and welcome to another episode of the Adrienne Ross Show. Of course, I am Adrienne, and I am glad you are tuned in to talk about what we're going to talk about today. And I don't expect to take a long time today at all. I just really want to leave some food for thought, okay? And what we're going to talk about is something that probably some people are going to be offended by. They're not going to agree with my take necessarily. Maybe some will, but I'm going to give you my take anyway because that's what I do. All right. Leah Thomas, of course, you've heard the name, the transgender swimmer who basically robbed from the women's swim team by deciding that he was going to identify as a woman, and somehow some woke folk decided to go along with that mess. And so we have some women who worked really, really hard to compete against other women, and yet here comes Leah Thomas and blows folks out of the water, excuse the pun. But there's been a lot of talk about that situation. Obviously, some people support Leah Thomas deciding he's going to be whoever he wants to be and take on some women. And then, of course, there have been people who've been vocal about the fact that this is simply not right. But I want to talk about the people who have decided that this is just not right. And of course, I'm in agreement. I look, sports, I love sports. You know, my background, athletics. I played sports growing up, big time. Basketball was my main sport. You know, I played at times volleyball. I played softball. I played soccer at times, and basketball was my thing. And I even coached. I coached for several years. Girls high school varsity basketball. Won a couple conference championships, etc. As an adult, I have been out there with dudes and I've beaten many a grown man even in the sport. I used to joke and say to my students, hey, I'm gonna be 50 years old saying give me the rock, because I just love the game and followed the NBA, was a Michael Jordan fan and a Bulls fan back in the day, and then became a Lakers fan, Kobe Bryant fan. And as far as the collegiate level with women's basketball, huge Coach Pat Summitt of the Tennessee Lady Vols, and I miss her very, very much. We lost a great in her, but so loved them and despise UConn, and I'll get back to UConn in a moment. But this subject about Leah Thomas, how does that relate to what I'm talking about? I'm not here just to talk about basketball, but I am really interested in the people who have chosen to be very vocal in support of the women's swim team and this whole and have spoken out against Leah Thomas. But the people who are defending the women, I just want to ask you to think about something, because I've been thinking about it, and I appreciate that so many voices have spoken up for these women athletes who deserve better than they got through this ridiculous situation with the transgender Leah Thomas. Can I just ask you, those of you who've been defending the women athletes, are you supporting women athletes on the regular? Are you watching women's sports? Are you applauding women's sports? And I'm not saying you have to. You don't have to, but I'm giving you food for thought. Because when this situation arose, all of a sudden you've got these people who have many, I'm sure, because you hear it, dissed women's sports, dissed, don't want anything to do with women's sports, don't support it, don't watch it, don't speak well of it at all, and don't acknowledge, in many cases, all the sacrifice that women have put into sports on various levels. Don't acknowledge that. Don't give them props for that, and really just kind of blow them off. And I don't mean just blow them off like ignoring them, which is bad enough, but even some being rather vocal, that's why I say rather vocal about their non-support of women's sports. Not that women's sports shouldn't exist, but they act like it's, as to use a phrase from the Little Rascals movie, like women are, you're scum between my toes. Love alfalfa. I don't know if you remember that, but I just threw that in. But yeah, acting like they're the bottom of the barrel. And then they're not worth watching. They're not worth supporting. They're not worth acknowledging all the work that they put into it. And I'm not just talking about guys. You hear that from some men too, who seem like their manhood is on the line if they watch women's sports or acknowledge women's sports. Women might be even worse. When it is March Madness time and they start talking about brackets and stuff like that, it's almost like the women's sports don't exist at all for some people. For men and women, they don't even mention it. It's like, they do they fill out their brackets, they got their little game thing going, they got their little, and yet they just totally ignore that. But now when this Leah Thomas situation comes up, all of a sudden you're hearing all these voices who are like so outraged, and they should be, about that situation. They're so outraged though, because they're saying things like, well, we need to support these women. These women have worked so hard. These women have beaten their bodies into shape so that they can compete at this high level. And I mean, you hear all this stuff, and I'm thinking, if you really believe that, where is your support on the regular? Again, not speaking down to them, speaking against what Leah Thomas has done and what has been allowed, but I'm just challenging them to go a step further, to think a little bit more. If you care that much, where's your support? Now, I remember saying this a few years ago because President Trump, everybody wanted to talk about President Trump because, he had not invited WNBA championship teams to the White House at one point, or NCAA women's basketball teams to the White House. And we have to take up with President Trump why that was the case for a while. Of course, there were some who said, even if we're not coming, and some who, but anyway, that's a whole different story. We can get into that whole political mess, I'm sure. But I remember back then hearing people really get on the horn, and they were blasting President Trump because how dare you diss these girls like that? And I couldn't help but say, y'all just as hypocritical as y'all can be. Because y'all ain't studying, just use an old expression from the black community, at least the Southern black community, right? Y'all ain't studying women's sports, but now you have an opportunity to diss President Trump about it. So now you all, whoop, whoop for the women's sports. And your heart is just so broken that he would dare treat them that way. Now, listen, you don't have to love it, but I'm going to call you out on it. Where's your concern on the regular? Was it just an opportunity to go after Donald Trump and make him seem like a sexist, just like you want to make him seem like a racist and all this stuff? So, food for thought. And now with this Leah Thomas situation, I'm glad that people are opening their mouths and saying, this just isn't right. This just isn't right, for after everything that women have gone through, to be able to be treated with respect and to have some kind of equality there in terms of athletics and the, Title IX and this whole thing. And then you ain't studying the women's sports. You're not studying the swim team on a regular. Many of you, and if you are, then I'm not talking to you, right? But I would dare say there are many of you who might be watching or listening, whatever the case may be. You don't watch women's sports. You don't support women's sports. You act like that it doesn't exist. But now Leah Thomas situation is here. All of a sudden you're outraged. And again, I think you should be. And I can't make you be interested in women's sports. I'm not. That's not even my goal. I don't even watch as much as I used to. But I'm asking you, is there a bit of hypocrisy in your reaction? Or is it, you might say, Adrian, there's no hypocrisy. One thing doesn't have to do with the other. And I agree that you can be outraged by this Leah Thomas thing, and you can see the injustice in it and still not be a fan of women's sports. I understand that. So I'm not saying that. I'm just throwing this out there, that all of a sudden there seems to be this vehement passion for supporting women, and yet many of them are like, they actually disrespect women's sports on a regular basis. But now, because this is such a huge cultural issue and moral issue, really, with Leah Thomas, your comments are not just about Leah Thomas, not who shouldn't be, competing against women. Your comments are all about supporting women's sports. So I just said to you, if that's really how you feel, then would you actually do that? And so here's the thing. I know. I mean, again, I'm not trying to make anybody watch women's sports, but I'm saying most of the time, if you hear athletes, great male athletes from the NBA or retired from the NBA or whatever, you'll hear them speak well of the women's game. I've always said it. I've heard other people say it. It's true. The women's game is a pure game if you're talking about basketball, because you can't rely just on physical strength. You've got to have finesse. You've got to have skills. You've got to actually play defense. I don't really watch the NBA anymore, but I tell you what, I look at some of the scores that scroll across the screen when I happen to have the television on, which is extremely rare. But I look at the scores and I'm like, does anybody even play defense anymore? I mean, you guys score. I mean, it's just ridiculous. I'm like, what, just run down the court and slam dunk or whatever? Women actually, some can dunk, but for the most part, women are not dunking. They've got to understand the skill. They've got to understand the fundamentals. They've got to have finesse. They've got to work really hard, okay, to get to that hoop. They got to be fundamentally sound to advance in the game. The women's game, and there are men who understand the game who will tell you that it's a pure game, and they don't feel like their manhood is on the line by saying that. It just is what it is, okay? So there's really no excuse for people to be trying to diss, women's sports, But like I said, it's fascinating to me that all of a sudden our comments about Leah Thomas are wrapped around this idea that women's sports should be respected, and when you're not doing that, on the regular basis, except that this lends itself to that because of the Leah Thomas situation, which is clearly an outrage. I hope you're hearing me. I'm not suggesting that people should not have outrage about that. I'm suggesting that maybe they ought to think about the whole big picture. If we're going to support people because they work hard and they deserve opportunities and they deserve to be supported, then shouldn't that flow in some way beyond this situation? I mean, it's just a thought. It's food for thought. I don't know. You might disagree. And again, I don't know if I should be, maybe you'll say to me, Adrian, they're just completely different. And I understand that. But at the same time, I'm making a good point. I know I am. So, I mean, you can disagree with that, but I know I am. So put your money where your mouth is. And don't pretend that you're all about women's sports when you're not, especially if you're opening your mouth and dissing that, which happens a lot. Or you just ignore, as many women do. And I think in many cases we're worse than the dudes, just absolutely off our radar. I mean, I can put up a post about this, that, and other thing, like you mentioned something about the women's Final Four, and it's like crickets for some people. I love the few who understand and get excited about it and all that, and they follow. And there are dudes, you know what I'm saying? I correspond with dudes who are just huge Tennessee fans, or God forbid, I say that kind of jokingly, UConn Lady Husky fan with Coach Gino Auriemma. Speaking of which, UConn lost the championship game to Dawn Staley's South Carolina Gamecocks. So congratulations to South Carolina for defeating the team that I just can't stand, and that's the UConn Huskies. Don't like them. I'm a hater, as I say. And the reason for that is because I'm a Tennessee Lady Vols fan, and the rivalry between Tennessee and UConn has been epic, or at least it was when Pat Summitt was on the sidelines coaching the Tennessee Lady Vols. Miss her tremendously. We lost a great one in with the early onset dementia that she experienced. But you want to talk about a rivalry. But so I was so thrilled to see that UConn lost, and a Dawn Staley. I have respect for Dawn Staley, at least athletically, as a former WNBA player she is, and so congratulations to her team for winning another championship. So I will leave it at that. I just I'd like to give you some thought. I'd love to hear your feedback. Tell me where I'm wrong. Tell me where I'm right. AdrianRoss.com@gmail.com would be the email address you can use. So I appreciate your attention and hearing my heart on this, and my hearing my perspective basically. So be sure to go to thebmgnetwork.com to check out the other podcasts. We are entertaining, I like to say, okay? But of course, we are informative and engaging and enlightening and all those other good things. So you want to go to thebmgnetwork.com and check out the other podcasts that we have there. All right. Also, if you enjoy the Adrienne Ross Show, please leave a rating and review at Apple Podcasts or Spotify, Google Podcasts, wherever you listen. Please do. And obviously, we are also on YouTube, so you can feel free to go to the BMG Network's YouTube channel and leave a comment there and subscribe and all that good stuff. All right, all that wonderful stuff. So thank you again for tuning in, and I will catch you on the next episode of the Adrienne Ross Show. As you can see, as I always say, A to Z, Adrienne is on it. So many different topics. All good. God bless you abundantly. The Adrienne Ross Show was produced and edited in the BMG studio. The music was provided by Kevin MacLeod. Find more episodes of The Adrienne Ross Show at thebmgnetwork.com and major podcast platforms. Be sure to tune in regularly. You don't want to miss even one episode.